At my son's wedding, my daughter-in-law demanded that I surrender the deeds to my vineyard right there in front of 150 guests. When I refused, she slapped me with such force that I stumbled and fell. I left the room and placed a call. She became frantic when she realized who was on the line. I'm grateful you're here with me. Stick with my tale to the very end and drop a comment with the town you're tuning in from. I'd love to know how widely my experience has traveled. I never dreamed my son's wedding would conclude with me bruised and aching on the elegant tile of the banquet hall, but that's precisely how Brian revealed his real intentions before an audience of 150 people. The afternoon had begun as any parent's ideal vision. Ethan looked handsome in his tailored suit, echoing the one his late grandfather had worn decades earlier, a subtle nod to family tradition. I stood proudly by his side at the altar in the historic church, holding back emotion as he exchanged vows, whispering to me earlier that he wished his mother could witness this milestone. For a brief instant, all seemed flawless. For that instant, I pushed aside the mounting discomfort I'd harbored about Brianna for the past several months. The vows were heartfelt and moving. Ethan beamed with joy, and I managed a genuine grin each time Brianna's gaze met mine. She possessed that refined poise, the sort that captivated most, but rang hollow to those who observed intently. I'd honed my observation skills over the last couple of years, particularly since she began probing about the vineyard estate, my estate plans, and what might become of the grounds once I stepped back. Yet weddings have an uncanny ability to unmask true characters, and Brianna's facade started cracking during the reception's mingling hour. I was positioned by the refreshment table, sipping a glass of our own estate red wine, observing Ethan share laughs with his university buddies when Brianna materialized at my side. Her elegant updo was slightly disheveled from the festivities, her cheeks rosy from the toasts, and there was a sharper edge in her expression, something more calculated and intense. "Edward," she said, placing her hand on my arm with an unnecessary firmness that made my skin prickle. "We should have a word." I pivoted to her, sensing how a few adjacent conversations had hushed. About what the term dear felt forced, but I used it for civility's sake. She glanced around and I noticed more eyes turning our way. About the vineyard, about Ethan's prospects, our prospects. "This isn't the moment or venue, Brianna." I lowered my tone, aiming to ease the tension that was building like a storm cloud. "It's your special day. Savor it." But Brianna had her own agenda. She inched nearer, her whisper carrying an undercurrent of menace that chilled me more than any raised voice could. "On the contrary, it's ideal. With all these observers present all these key figures from our circles." A shiver traced my back. The emphasis on observers twisted my gut. I scanned the area and saw we were encircled by her professional contacts, her relatives' faces I scarcely recognized. Ethan was on the far side of the hall, still engaged in merriment with his friends, unaware of the unfolding drama. "Brianna, whatever scheme you're brewing, I'm considering." She cut in her volume, rising just enough to draw more attention. "That it's high time for some true benevolence, some authentic familial backing." And that's when I spotted it. She delved into her clutch and extracted a delicate satin pouch. Initially, I assumed it was yet another ceremonial token, but as she unveiled it, my pulse quickened in alarm. Nestled inside were keys, my keys. The ones to the main residence, the cellars, the storage barns. Keys I had certainly not handed over. "How on earth did you obtain those?" I demanded, my composure fraying. Brianna's grin turned sly and triumphant. Ethan duplicated them. He believed it would be a touching reveal, a meaningful symbol. She elevated the pouch, ensuring the onlookers caught sight. "But we require the authentic set. Wouldn't you agree?" Complete with the title transfer forms. The wine in my glass sloshed as my grip trembled with fury. "The what?" "Let's not feign ignorance, Edward." Her tone was now audible to the growing cluster around us. "Ethan is your sole heir. The vineyard ought to be his ours. And truthfully, a gentleman of your years shouldn't bear such a load solo." I sensed the scrutiny of 150 sets of eyes upon us. The band had ceased playing. Even the catering staff had halted mid-task. Brianna had masterminded this, impeccably crafting a spectacle where my denial would paint me as self-centered and irrational. The vineyard isn't transferring anywhere, I stated measuredly, and this discussion belongs elsewhere. For when you're no longer here, Brianna's veneer shattered further. Ethan merits stability now. We both do. And that vineyard sits idle squandered on an elderly man who struggles to oversee it any longer. The barb struck like a dagger. A few guests inhaled sharply. I noticed Ethan's cousin Elaine clasp her hand over her lips in dismay. In the background, Ethan had at last detected the stir and was navigating toward us, his tuxedo jacket unbuttoned, bewilderment etched on his features. I said, "No. Brianna." My tone held firm despite the inner turmoil, and I stood by it. That's when the atmosphere shifted irrevocably. Brianna's features contorted in fury, all traces of decorum evaporated. She advanced, her breath laced with the scent of sparkling wine and raw anger. "You obstinate relic! Do you comprehend whom you're challenging?" Before I could retort, before I could retreat, before any bystander could step in, Brianna's palm connected with my cheek in a resounding crack that reverberated through the hushed banquet hall like thunder. The impact was fierce enough to unbalance me. My right foot skidded on the sleek tile, and I tumbled heavily, my knee striking first, followed by my elbow. Agony surged through my frame as I sprawled there, dazed, the metallic tang of blood seeping into my mouth from where I'd nicked my lip. For an eternal second, utter quiet reigned. Then the murmurs erupted, swelling like a tide. Did she truly strike him? Heavens, did anyone catch that "fetch security, please"? I propped myself on one arm, surveying the ring of appalled expressions encircling me. Brianna loomed above her, breathing ragged, her hands still balled into fists. She appeared as stunned as the crowd, as though she couldn't fathom her own actions. That's when I glimpsed Ethan. He stood at the periphery of the gathering, his palm pressed to his forehead, shock mingling with horror on his face. Yet he didn't surge forward. He didn't hasten to aid his father assaulted at his own wedding. He gazed at Brianna with an expression bordering on apprehension. In that instant, I understood this wasn't the debut of her volatile side for him. Gradually, with effort, I rose to my feet. My knee throbbed in protest, and I could sense a welt blooming on my face, but I held my posture erect. I met Brianna's eyes directly, then swept my gaze over the assembly of guests, many of whom I'd known for lifetimes. "I believe," I uttered softly, my words resonating in the breathless hush, "this celebration has reached its conclusion." I pivoted and strode toward the exit, my limb protesting each stride. Behind me, Brianna's voice echoed now, edged with urgency. "Edward, hold on. I didn't intend that was, we can resolve this." I didn't glance back. I didn't acknowledge her. I merely exited the banquet hall, departed the venue, and crossed to the lot where my pickup awaited. Once ensconced in the driver's seat, I retrieved my phone. My fingers trembled still, but I navigated to the contact I required. The line rang once, twice. Then a trusted voice responded. "Edward, how was the wedding?" I shut my eyes, bearing the gravity of the step I was initiating. "Thomas, I require you in Atlanta this evening. It's time." A brief silence followed. "Are you certain? Once initiated, there's no reversal." I peered back at the venue, where silhouettes stirred behind the illuminated panes of the banquet hall. Somewhere within my son was likely distressed. Somewhere within Brianna was doubtless attempting to rationalize the chaos. Somewhere within the existence I'd cultivated for the past 28 years was unraveling. "I'm certain," I affirmed. "It's time the truth about the vineyard emerged." As I pulled away, I caught sight of Brianna in my rear view, framed in the venue's doorway. Gesturing wildly on her phone, her composure shattered by dread. She had no inkling of what awaited her, but she was on the verge of discovery. The journey back to the vineyard afforded me ample time to reflect on the path that led here. 30 miles of shadowed roadway lay ahead, and with each passing mile the recollections surged forth. Not the joyful ones from Ethan's youth, but the deliberate incremental erosion of our bond that Brianna had engineered over the last 2 years. It commenced subtly, as these matters invariably do, minor remarks that appeared benign initially. "Dad looks quite weary these days, doesn't he?" Ethan would note during our weekend suppers. "Perhaps he's overexerting himself at the vineyard." At the outset, I viewed it as solicitude. My 72-year-old frame did protest more frequently, and tending to 600 acres of grapevines wasn't simplifying with age, but then the observations grew more recurrent, more incisive. Brianna suggests you might consider additional staff. He mentioned one twilight as we lounged on the veranda overlooking the rolling hills. She's concerned about you managing it all single-handedly. Brianna, who had never tended a vine before encountering my son Brianna, who donned high-end attire to casual gatherings and fussed over the soil. Brianna was concerned for me. The genuine coercion emerged roughly 20 months prior, shortly after Brianna's engagement. Abruptly, every dialogue with Ethan incorporated her viewpoints, her worries, her recommendations. She was perpetually the sensible one, the pragmatic one, the guardian of all interests. Brianna mentions it's unjust that I lack any formal stake in the vineyard, Ethan confided one day, his demeanor cautiously neutral. She notes most parents would have initiated the handover by now. I recall how my tea soured that afternoon, how my chest constricted with an unnamed foreboding. Handover. You know, assigning the estate to me for fiscal advantages. Brianna's researched it. She claims we could conserve substantial sums in inheritance levies with forward planning. Brianna again. Perpetually Brianna, with her inquiries, her strategies, her expedient fixes for issues I hadn't recognized. The most painful aspect was witnessing my son transform. Ethan had always been self-reliant, determined like his mother. He'd assisted during harvests in his teens, familiar with every row of vines and irrigation line. Yet progressively, Brianna's words emerged from his lips. "Dad, you're being inflexible on this vineyard matter," he remarked, during one especially strained meal. Brianna merely wishes to assist. She possesses expertise in estate oversight. Estate oversight. As if Willow Creek Vineyard were merely another investment portfolio. As if the terrain my great-grandfather cultivated in 1918 were simply a commercial commodity to optimize. What sort of expertise I inquired, though, I anticipated the response would dismay me. She oversees multiple luxury properties in Atlanta. She's versed in land appraisals, market shifts, that kind of detail. That kind of detail. Not the sort involving rising at dawn to inspect for frost damage or losing rest during dry spells, beseeching the reservoirs to hold. The strain amplified post-engagement. Brianna began appearing unannounced often when Ethan was absent. She'd roam the grounds with her tablet, capturing images, querying about acreage and water rights. Just intrigued, she'd claim with that honed smile, seeking to grasp Ethan's roots. But roots weren't what she was appraising. I overheard her on a call one midday, positioned by the tasting room, conversing with someone regarding comparable sales and redevelopment prospects. When she noticed my approach, she terminated the discussion swiftly. "Professional call," she clarified. "You understand." I didn't understand. I'd never conducted a professional call loitering in another's tasting room without consent. The deceptions began minor as well. Brianna would inform Ethan that I'd consented to matters I'd never endorsed, that I'd uttered phrases I'd never voiced. Dad assured Brianna he's prepared to ease up. Ethan relayed one Sunday. "He's enthusiastic about you assuming greater operations." I regarded my son across the supper table, scouring his expression for any hint he recognized this falsehood. But he trusted her. He desired to trust her. When did I express that? I queried cautiously. "Last week during your chat near the northern vines, Brianna said you appeared eased to share the load." I recollected that exchange. Brianna had ambushed me while I was pruning pressing inquiries about yield margins and maintenance expenses. I'd offered curt replies and departed promptly. Somehow she'd construed my courtesy as zeal for her participation. The psychological distortion intensified thence. Per Brianna, I was perpetually voicing things I didn't recall, endorsing things I'd never sanctioned. Ethan began regarding me with apprehension, as if I were growing absent-minded, undependable. "Are you all right, Dad?" he posed one twilight, after Brianna asserted. I'd vowed to display her the boundary surveys. "You appear somewhat disoriented recently." Disoriented. That's what Brianna aimed for him to believe, that his aging father was faltering, turning burdensome, perhaps even hazardous to himself and others. The reality was, I was keener than I'd been in years. I commenced attending to every syllable Brianna uttered, every assertion she made, every narrative she spun. I began jotting notes, tracking her fabrications, and I initiated phone calls. The initial call was to my attorney, Mark Reynolds, who'd managed my matters for 22 years. Has anyone reached out regarding shifting the vineyard estate? I queried him. No, Edward, should they have Brianna Thompson. Ethan's fiancée. She's been informing him that estate shifts are standard for tax motives. A prolonged silence ensued. Edward, you're aware of the vineyard's status. That's not precisely correct. I believe it's time to initiate some calls, Mark. Are you certain? Once we commence this procedure, I'm certain. The subsequent call was tougher. Thomas Whitaker had served as my liaison for 28 years, touching base quarterly, overseeing the monetary facets of my role. He was taken aback by the unscheduled contact. Everything in order. Edward, I believe it's time to disclose the setup, I informed him. My son's wedding approaches with someone oblivious to the circumstances. That's a significant choice. Are you positive I contemplated Brianna's influence on my son, her whispers in his ear, her schemes for terrain she deemed hers? I'm positive. The third call proved the most arduous. Dr. Elena Ramirez had been our household doctor for 18 years. She welcomed Ethan into the world, supported Elizabeth through the illness battles, and guided me through my bleakest days. Elena, I require a favor. I need a thorough physical and mental appraisal. Edward, your yearly exam was just 4 months past. All was sound. I know, but I require formal records. Official proof that I'm cognitively sound and physically adept. A pause. Is someone implying otherwise? I detailed the scenario as meticulously as possible. How Brianna was depicting me as muddled, forgetful, incapable of handling my duties. How Ethan was beginning to accept it. That manipulative wretch, Elena muttered, her composure fracturing. Pardon my frankness, but that's psychological torment, classic coercion. Can you assist? I'll surpass that. I'll administer every assessment available, lab tests, mental evaluation, physical endurance check. By the end, you'll possess records showing you're more acute than many in their 50s. The outcomes align precisely with Elena's forecast. Ideal vital signs, superior mental acuity. Physical prowess exceeding norms for my age bracket. I secured the health documents in my vault alongside the other files that would soon prove vital. But I committed one error amid those months of readiness. I undervalued the lengths Brianna would pursue to attain her goals. I presumed she'd persist with gradual pressure eroding my resolve through endurance and insistence. I assumed she'd sustain the mental campaign gradually, persuading Ethan that his father was too aged and obstinate to manage the estate competently. I never foresaw she'd attempt to disgrace me openly at her own wedding. I never anticipated she'd be so frantic as to insist on the vineyard deeds before 150 observers, and I absolutely never expected her to strike me. That slap altered everything. It advanced my schedule by months, compelled my action in a manner I hadn't foreseen, but perhaps that was beneficial. Perhaps it was time for Brianna to discover that certain secrets merit safeguarding and certain deceptions carry repercussions she could never envision. As I arrived at the vineyard entrance, I noticed my phone illuminating with unanswered calls. Ethan, undoubtedly, maybe Brianna, certainly folks who'd observed the incident at the reception and sought what followed. But there was solely one call I prioritized. I redialed Thomas's number as I lingered in my pickup, gazing over the terrain I'd safeguarded for 28 years. Thomas, it's Edward once more. How swiftly can you assemble the board in Atlanta? If it's pressing, I can have them there by dawn tomorrow. I brushed my tender cheek, sensed the soreness in my knee where I'd collided with the tile. It's pressing. Brianna Thompson just committed the gravest error of her existence. It's time she learned who truly possesses Willow Creek Vineyard. The reality of Willow Creek Vineyard originated 28 years ago on the darkest day of my existence. Elizabeth had battled illness for 20 months, and we'd depleted our reserves on therapies that ultimately failed to preserve her. I was in the clinic's administrative office confronting statements summing over $400,000 when the vineyard overseer located me. "Mr. Edward," he uttered, cap clutched in hands. "I'm truly sorry to intrude at such a moment, but we've an issue." The issue was blight the most severe in 60 years. Our vines were withering, our yields plummeting, and we lacked funds to introduce resistant strains. The lenders were already hovering discussing seizure. Elizabeth was lost. Ethan was merely 9, and I was poised to forfeit all my family had constructed since 1918. That's when Thomas Whitaker rapped on my door. I'll always remember that dusk. I was on the veranda observing the sun dip below the hills that might soon cease to be mine when a sleek sedan ascended the path. A gentleman in a sharp suit emerged toting a leather case and bearing the assured demeanor that accompanies substantial wealth. Mr. Harrington. I'm Thomas Whitaker speaking for the Horizon Preservation Group. I hear you might entertain a partnership proposal. I was too drained for courtesy. If you're here to lowball on my vineyard, spare us both the effort. Actually, he replied, easing into the veranda seat uninvited. I'm here to propose something unique, an opportunity to retain your vineyard and resolve your fiscal woes enduringly. He unlatched his case and withdrew a substantial agreement. Horizon focuses on viticultural conservation. We acquire vineyards and estates from families in distress, then rent them back to the founders for stewardship. You maintain your residence, your vocation, your heritage. We manage the finances. I remain doubtful. What's the drawback? No drawback. You serve as our vineyard steward. We provide a substantial wage cover all running costs and manage upgrades and growth. Outwardly, nothing alters. You're still Edward Harrington overseeing the Harrington Vineyard, but lawfully the estate is Horizon's. For what duration perpetually? As long as you desire the setup to persist. When you're set to retire, we'll devise a shift strategy. If you wish to repurchase the estate someday, we'll discuss equitable conditions based on present valuation. I gazed at the agreement thoughts whirling. Why offer this? What benefits you? Thomas grinned. Horizon isn't a typical funding entity, Mr. Harrington. We act for affluent patrons who value upholding American viticultural traditions. They don't seek instant gains. They're investing long-term. Who are these patrons? That's private, but I can assure you they're dedicated stewards who recognize that family vineyards like yours form this nation's core. They'd prefer them conserved and adeptly managed over fragmented and vended to speculators. The proposal seemed overly favorable. Compensation of $75,000 annually plus comprehensive perks, all vineyard outlays covered total independence in routine operations, and crucially, Ethan would succeed my role upon my departure alongside the choice to ultimately reclaim the land. I require reflection naturally, but Mr. Harrington, the lender, intends to launch seizure actions next week. This proposal lapses in 72 hours. I endorsed the agreement that evening. What alternative existed I was submerging, and Horizon extended a rescue. The following day, crews arrived with grafting tools. Within a week, we had robust new vines thriving. Within a month, the harvest prospects revived. Within 8 months, the vineyard surpassed its prior profitability under my tenure. For 28 years, the partnership functioned impeccably. Horizon dispatched regular payments, absorbed major expenditures, and never meddled in my choices. Thomas visited quarterly, ever amicable and encouraging. I was the steward, but to all outsiders I remained the proprietor. Even Ethan presumed the vineyard was mine. I intended to reveal the truth at his 21st birthday, but he was immersed in studies, then centered on academics and friendships. Upon graduation, he relocated to Atlanta for his profession. The vineyard wasn't his immediate concern, so I delayed the disclosure. Then Brianna entered the scene and all shifted. The initial visit Brianna made to the vineyard she toured as if appraising for auction. She posed targeted queries on acreage, soil composition, and valuation. She requested to view title records, tax evaluations, and revenue logs. Merely exploring Ethan's legacy, she justified when I spotted her photographing the sellers and presses. But her inquiries were too precise, too strategic. She wasn't merely inquisitive about Ethan's tomorrow. She was plotting. I contacted Thomas that week. We may face a complication. What sort Ethan's partner is posing numerous questions about the estate. She's urging for details I can't provide without exposing the structure. How committed is the bond committed enough that she's discussing matrimony? A lengthy pause. Edward recalled the agreement terms. If any outsider uncovers the actual ownership framework, Horizon reserves the right to dissolve the setup instantly. I knew I'd perused that provision countless times across the years. It was Horizon's safeguard against exposure or legal entanglements. If news spread that prosperous backers were covertly acquiring family vineyards, it could spark issues they aimed to evade. What are my alternatives? Disclose the truth to your son. If he's contemplating wedding this woman, he must know what he's truly inheriting. But whenever I attempted to inform Ethan, Brianna was present, diverting the dialogue, posing her own inquiries, drawing her own conclusions. She presumed the vineyard was prized terrain that would eventually be Ethan's. She presumed I was a prosperous landowner who could lavish wedding presents and monetary aid. She had no notion that I was fundamentally a generously compensated, respectfully handled staff member administering another's holding. The tension heightened after their betrothal. Brianna began remarking on enhancements she envisioned, alterations she foresaw for the grounds. She discussed segmenting groves, establishing event spaces, perhaps even divesting sections for leisure developments. This locale holds immense promise, she informed me one midday, atop the ridge surveying the primary building. With proper promotion, we could transform this into a premier wine destination, nuptial site, executive, getaways that ilk. My veins iced. The Horizon Agreement expressly forbade any commercial expansion sans board consent. Brianna was scheming to convert a functional grape vineyard into a tourist hub. That's not my vision for the site, I conveyed to her cautiously. Well, it won't be your call much longer, will it? She beamed, but her tone carried an edge. Once Ethan and I wed, we'll handle those decisions. That's when I grasped Brianna wasn't merely anticipating inheriting the vineyard. She was plotting to seize it while I yet breathed. She was maneuvering to sideline me, persuade Ethan that I was too elderly and rigid to administer the estate proficiently. I commenced chronicling every exchange, every request, every falsehood she fed Ethan about what I'd allegedly consented to. I also began readying for the unavoidable clash. The health appraisal was merely the start. I also had my attorney compile a full dossier on Brianna Thompson, her financial past, her commercial ventures, her prior liaisons. What we unearthed was unsavory. Brianna had a habit of pursuing men with holdings. Her prior engagement dissolved when her partner uncovered she'd covertly leveraged his family trust. Her business alliances routinely collapsed, leaving associates burdened with liabilities while Brianna advanced to fresh prospects. But the most incriminating data stemmed from her present position. Brianna faced an internal probe for dubious reimbursements and misuse of firm assets. She was apt to be dismissed within the ensuing 6 months. She was frantic, and frantic individuals commit perilous acts. I ought to have disclosed all to Ethan pre-wedding. I ought to have convened him and elucidated the entirety from the Horizon Pact to Brianna's monetary woes, but I clung to hope he'd discern her machinations independently. I persisted in faith that my astute, autonomous son would identify the transpiring. Instead, Brianna escalated to communal degradation and bodily aggression. She compelled my action in the most heinous fashion before the most adverse spectators. Now seated in my pickup at the Vineyard Drive, I recognized there was no retreat. Tomorrow morn, Thomas would arrive with the Horizon board. Brianna would discover she'd just assaulted the steward of a vineyard held by some exceedingly influential figures who disdained menaces to their holdings or assaults on their personnel. My phone vibrated a message from Brianna. Noon at the vineyard. Bring the title and all documents. Time to formalize this. I displayed the note to Margaret Caldwell's counterpart in my mind, but in reality it was time for her to learn the truth. She smiled in my recollection, devoid of warmth. Ideal. Ms. Thompson desires formality. Will gladly oblige. Brianna reached the vineyard 10 minutes ahead, piloting her financed Mercedes as if she commanded the domain. I observed from the study window as she parked beside the entry steps, smoothing her blouse and inspecting her makeup in the visor mirror. She was oblivious that 5 of the most formidable individuals I'd encountered were monitoring from the outbuilding where they'd stationed with an unobstructed view of the residence. The Horizon Protection Squad had materialized 90 minutes prior, 4 ex-law enforcement specialists who now managed delicate matters for the group. They were posted throughout the grounds, concealed yet prepared. The board lead had been explicit on their directives. Monitor, document, and intercede solely if Brianna turned aggressive. Recall she'd advised me prior to assuming her spot in the outbuilding, allow her to speak, permit her to voice her demands, grant her sufficient leash to ensnare herself juridically. I unlatched the front entrance before Brianna could rap. She marched in with that acquainted arrogance, toting a sleek portfolio and donning a look of scarcely veiled victory. Edward, she uttered, skipping the handshake. I'm pleased you've seen reason. This truly benefits all. Does it? Undoubtedly. Ethan's ease that we're at last addressing this matter. He was so anxious about you post yesterday. He positioned his portfolio on the oak dining surface and unfastened it. I've prepared all requisite forms, estate conveyance authorization papers, all to render this binding. I eyed the documents she was arraying across my great-aunt's dining surface. Legal papers she'd evidently readied beforehand, likely weeks past. This wasn't an impulsive choice spurred by tension and libations. This was a meticulously orchestrated endeavor. You've been gearing up for this a while. Brianna glanced up, jarred by the insight. For an instant, her veneer faltered, and I discerned scheming in her gaze. Then she compelled a grin. Well, I am a professional, Edward. I value readiness. After Ethan and I betrothed, I began contemplating family holdings, succession strategy, that nature. Merely being diligent. Diligent! I seated across from her, mindful of the compact recording tool the legal advisor had supplied tucked in my coat pocket. Elaborate on diligence, Brianna. Elaborate on your diligence to your employer. Her motion halted over the forms. Pardon your occupation, Brianna. The one you're on the cusp of forfeiting for misappropriation. The hue fled her countenance. I haven't the faintest what you mean. Certainly you do. Firm charge cards employed for personal outlays, invoicing patrons for labor unrendered. Your superiors plan to terminate you next week. They're likely pursuing legal action too. Brianna's gaze flitted to the windows as if abruptly conscious we might not be solitary. Who disclosed that? Does it signify? What signifies is that Ethan remains unaware, correct? He knows not of the betting obligations either, or the charge balances, or that you owe some highly perilous folks considerable sums. She rose abruptly, her seat grating against the plank floor. You've been probing me. I've been shielding my son, the identical son you've been methodically coercing for 2 years. Coercing. Her pitch escalated with authentic indignation. I adore Ethan. All I've done has been for him, for our tomorrow jointly. All you've done has been for yourself. You perceived a solitary man with an affluent father, and you perceived a chance. Brianna's poise fractured entirely. Affluent father, you believe you're affluent. This site is encumbered heavily. Edward, I've examined the fiscal logs. You're scarcely balancing on this grape venture. The sole genuine holding you possess is the terrain itself. There it was. The confession that she'd been scrutinizing my finances, scheming to liquidate all I'd labored for. I maintained my composure steady. So you desire the terrain, I desire assurance for my spouse. Ethan merits superior to fretting whether his aging father can sustain this place. He leaned ahead, his demeanor turning condescending anew. Look, I know you're proud. I know this vineyard signifies much to you, but be pragmatic. You're 72 years old. You lack assistance, and this operation is scarcely lucrative. Vend to a builder, allocate the funds wisely, and all triumph. All triumph. You secure monetary stability for your twilight years. Ethan secures his legacy while youthful enough to relish it, and I secure to tend to both of you as kin ought. As kin ought emanating from a woman who just conceded she wished to vend my great-grandfather's vineyard to builders. What sort of builder are you envisioning? Brianna's gaze ignited with zeal. She withdrew her phone and commenced scrolling through images. I've already held some initial dialogues. There's a firm from Charlotte that focuses on upscale residential enclaves. They're keenly interested in this spot. She oriented the phone toward me, displaying design sketches of a secured neighborhood dubbed Vine Hill Residences. 180 dwellings, a spa facility, and a boutique center all erected on what once was Willow Creek Vineyard. They're proposing $5.6 million for the entire 600 acres, Brianna proceeded. Imagine Edward, $5.6 million. You'd never fret about funds again. I examined the sketches, feeling queasy. You've already bartered a figure. Initial talks solely. I informed them I needed to confer with kin first, but yes, they're highly eager. They aim to commence construction next autumn, and you receive a referral bonus on this transaction. Brianna paused a beat too long. Well, there would be a locator's compensation customary in these sorts of deals. How much? 3%, $280,000. She voiced it swiftly, as if the sum was inconsequential. But that's not my motive, Edward. This concerns kin. $280,000, ample to settle her betting debts and charges with surplus for a new beginning elsewhere. Likely sans Ethan once he'd fulfilled his role. What does Ethan opine about converting his boyhood home into a housing tract? Ethan desires what's optimal for you. He trusts me with the commercial facets, because you've convinced him I'm inept. Brianna's veneer slipped anew, unveiling a spark of annoyance. Because you are behaving inept. This vineyard is a draining enterprise, and you're too rigid to concede it. How long do you reckon you can maintain this? Another 6 years, 12. What occurs when you suffer a stroke out here isolated? What occurs when you tumble from a ladder and shatter your leg? She was rousing herself into justified wrath, now embracing her own rationales. Ethan will inherit this locale regardless when you pass. All I'm doing is ensuring he acquires something worthwhile instead of a mound of debt and dilapidated structures. Very considerate of you. It is considerate and it's practical, but you can't peer beyond your own arrogance to do what's proper for your son. That's when I discerned the noise of vehicle doors closing outside. Brianna heard it too and shifted to the window. Who are those people? She queried, her tone abruptly strained. I joined her at the window. The board chair was advancing toward the house, accompanied by the legal advisor and operations head. Trailing them came Thomas and the remaining board. All 5 bore expressions that could chill a summer day. Those are the individuals who truly own this vineyard, I stated softly. Brianna whirled to confront me. What are you implying? I'm implying that I don't own Willow Creek Vineyard, Brianna. I never have. I'm the steward. I labor for them. The portfolio tumbled from Brianna's grasp, scattering forms across the floor. That's absurd. 28 years ago, I faced insolvency. These individuals acquired the vineyard and employed me to administer it. All you've witnessed, all you've plotted, all you've menaced me for, none belongs to me. Brianna's countenance traversed a gamut of emotions: bewilderment, incredulity, and ultimately comprehension. You're fabricating. I wish I were, but those advancing to my door, they represent a group valued at around $3 billion. They possess vineyards, orchards, and agrarian estates across 7 states, and you've devoted the last year attempting to swindle them. The rap on the door arrived precisely on cue. I opened it to discover the board chair and her team awaiting on the steps. Mr. Harrington, she articulated formally, appreciate you summoning us. I trust you have someone here eager to discuss estate dealings. Brianna was retreating toward the distant wall, her eyes widened in alarm. This is an ambush. No, Brianna, I uttered sorrowfully. This is actuality something you've evaded for quite some time. The board chair entered the space, her aura instantly commanding the area. Mr. Thompson, I assume I'm the chair of the Horizon Preservation Group. I comprehend you've been inquiring about our estate. Our estate? Willow Creek Vineyard, 600 acres of premium Georgia grape terrain procured by Horizon in 1997. Mr. Harrington here is our vineyard steward and an exemplary one. The legal advisor unlatched his case and extracted a bulky dossier. We possess transcripts of your dialogue this morning, Ms. Thompson. Blackmail attempted deceit scheme to perpetrate senior mistreatment. Quite a notable array of offenses. Brianna glanced wildly about the room as if hunting an egress. You can't substantiate anything. Actually, we can. The operations director held aloft a compact digital recorder, every syllable documented with Mr. Harrington's complete collaboration. We also hold affidavits from your wedding banquet, the risk manager appended, stepping in with the others. Assault on an elder before 150 observers. The prosecutor is keenly pursuing indictment. Brianna's knees buckled. She collapsed into a seat, her head cradled in palms. This can't be transpiring. Oh, but it is, the board chair stated icily. You see, Ms. Thompson, Horizon safeguards its holdings, and more vitally, we safeguard our personnel. Mr. Harrington has served us loyally for 28 years. When someone endangers him, they endanger us. What do you seek? Brianna's voice was scarcely audible. We seek your vanishing, she declared plainly, permanently. From Mr. Harrington's existence from this estate and from Georgia, if you're wise. The legal advisor positioned a form on the table. This is a protective order effective forthwith. You are barred from contacting Mr. Harrington, his son, or anyone linked to this estate. Breach will yield prompt detention. You can't enforce this. Ethan is my spouse. Actually, the risk manager stated, consulting her device, your union may lack validity. Our probe has uncovered intriguing details about your prior bonds. There's indication implying you never adequately dissolved your initial marriage. Brianna's visage paled. That's impossible, is it? We'll permit the officials to unravel that. Meanwhile, you have precisely 1 hour to gather your items and depart the state. The board chair approached nearer, her tone dropping to just above a murmur. Ms. Thompson, you are a petty, wretched individual who preys on susceptible men. You are precisely the type of opportunist we've spent 28 years barring from estates like this. She erected her volume, normalizing. You will not reach Ethan. You will not endeavor to assert any estate or holdings. You will vanish discreetly, or we will obliterate you utterly. Do I convey clarity? Brianna nodded desperately, then regarded me with something akin to supplication in her gaze. Edward, please. I aired gravely, but I truly cherish Ethan. I held her gaze steadfastly. If you cherished my son, you never would have attempted to pilfer his legacy. You never would have deceived him regarding me. And you certainly never would have struck me at his wedding. The protection squad materialized in the entry 4 imposing figures who somehow diminished the room. Time to depart, Ms. Thompson 1 articulated courteously. Brianna collected her dispersed papers with quivering hands, crammed them back into her portfolio, and proceeded toward the door. At the sill, she pivoted back once more. This isn't concluded, the board chair beamed, but there was no cordiality in it whatsoever. Oh, Ms. Thompson, this is very, very concluded. The quietude following Brianna's exit was deep. I lingered on my veranda, observing the dust resettle from her Mercedes as it vanished down the vineyard path, knowing I'd never encounter her again. The Horizon board members were assembled in my den, softly stowing their documents and bracing for what would be the most challenging dialogue of my existence. Mr. Harrington, the board chair, uttered gently, "We must address your son." Kind, credulous Ethan, who was likely in some inn chamber, now pondering why his wedding had devolved into turmoil and why his fresh spouse had abruptly vanished. He had no conception that his marriage was probably void, that Brianna had schemed to rob his inheritance, or that all he held true about his kin was founded on a 28-year-old deception. He's going to resent me, I murmured. Thomas shook his head. He'll be wounded and perplexed, but he'll also be alleviated once he comprehends what Brianna was truly plotting. The legal advisor glanced up from his device. We've pinpointed him. He's at the Ritz in Midtown. Our sleuths conversed with the inn personnel. He's been in his suite since yesterday, declining all contacts except from Brianna, who ceased calling about 90 minutes ago. The risk manager supplemented meaningfully. The board chair decided. We'll proceed to him collectively, all of us. He needs to hear the facts from you, but he also needs to grasp the broader canvas. An hour hence, we were seated in the inn's secluded meeting chamber. Ethan arrived appearing fatigued and bewildered, still in yesterday's formal wear, his eyes swollen from emotion when he spotted me with 5 strangers in professional garb. His perplexity intensified. Dad, what's occurring? Where's Brianna? She was meant to rendezvous here hours past, but she's not responding. I directed him to a seat, my heart aching at the faith still evident in his eyes. Son, we need to converse. There are matters you must know. Is this regarding yesterday about the reception incident? He surveyed the room anxiously. Dad, I know Brianna shouldn't have. I know she flared up, but you were so resistant about the vineyard, and she's been under immense strain. Ethan, my tone was sterner than planned. Brianna struck me. She assaulted me before 150 people because I wouldn't yield something that was never mine to yield, never yours to yield. Dad, what do you mean? The board chair leaned ahead. Mr. Harrington, I'm the chair of the Horizon Preservation Group. We possess Willow Creek Vineyard. The statement lingered in the atmosphere like a tangible entity. Ethan blinked repeatedly as if mishearing. You possess, but that's impossible. The vineyard has been in our lineage for generations. It was in your lineage, Thomas clarified softly. Until 28 years ago when your father confronted insolvency after your mother's medical costs. Horizon acquired the estate and employed your father as vineyard steward. I observed my son's countenance as the ramifications struck him. Vineyard steward. I'm staff son. A generously compensated, respectfully handled staff, but staff nonetheless. I've never held the terrain. I never possessed the authority to convey it to you or anyone. Ethan's respiration grew labored. But you always spoke of it as my bequest. You always said the vineyard would be mine eventually. And it could be. The board chair stated, Horizon has always been open to vending the estate back to the Harrington family if and when they were positioned to acquire it. How much would that entail? The financial officer consulted his device. Present market worth is roughly $5.1 million. The figure impacted Ethan like a blow. He slumped back in his seat, gazing blankly. $5.1 million, Brianna said. Brianna thought she was wedding into fortune. The operations director said bluntly, she devoted 2 years scheming to pilfer what she believed was your bequest. The risk manager unlatched her case and withdrew a substantial dossier. Mr. Harrington, we need you to comprehend precisely whom you wed. Brianna Thompson is a swindler with a pattern of targeting men with holdings. For the ensuing 40 minutes, they outlined all. Brianna's liabilities, her job issues, her record of fiscal deceit. They presented him the recordings of her calls, the proof of her coercion, the evidence she'd plotted to vend the vineyard to builders. But the harshest disclosure arrived last. There's also indication implying your union may lack legal standing, the legal advisor stated cautiously. Brianna seems to have never adequately dissolved her initial marriage. Ethan emitted a noise like an injured creature. She's wed to another. Was wed. The initial spouse has been unaccounted for 4 years. There's an active inquiry. My son hunched over as if struck in the abdomen. I extended toward him, but he recoiled. Don't, he murmured. Just don't. We lingered in quietude for several minutes. I could hear the hum of the city beyond the faint clatter of the metropolis persisting its routine while my son's world disintegrated in an in-meeting chamber. At last he glanced up at me with eyes brimming with anguish. Did you know about Brianna? Did you know what she was executing? I suspected. I endeavored to probe, but I couldn't substantiate anything until lately. Why didn't you inform me? It was the query I dreaded. Because I hoped you'd discern through her independently. Because I didn't wish to be the parent who shattered his son's joy based on hunches. And because you feared I wouldn't trust you, he uttered quietly. I nodded. She was adept at rendering me the issue, making you question my discernment, my capability. He was very skilled at making me appear the problem. Making you doubt my judgment, my competency. Ethan was silent for an extended period, absorbing all he'd learned. When he finally spoke, his voice was steady but distant. I need time. I need to process all of this. The board chair rose. Of course. Take all the time you require. Mr. Harrington's role at the vineyard is secure for as long as he desires it, and if you ever decide you want to discuss purchasing the property, we're always willing to negotiate with the Harrington family. After they departed, Ethan and I sat alone in the meeting room. The silence extended between us, filled with 28 years of secrets and 2 years of manipulation. I feel so foolish, he finally said. You're not foolish. You're trusting. There's a difference. Is there I let a stranger convince me that my own father was losing his mind. I believed Brianna when she said you were becoming forgetful, unstable. I actually started researching care facilities. Dad, I was planning to have you declared incompetent. The admission struck me harder than Brianna's slap had. Son, no. Let me finish. I let her poison my relationship with you. I let her make me doubt everything I knew about the man who raised me, who worked tirelessly to give me a good life after Mom died. Tears streamed down his face now. And for what? For a woman who saw me as nothing but a path to money, she could steal. I reached for his hand, and this time he didn't pull away. Brianna was a professional. She knew exactly how to manipulate both of us. But I should have known better. I should have trusted you. We sat holding hands while he cried, both of us grieving for different things. He was mourning the loss of his marriage, his trust, his sense of judgment. I was mourning the relationship we'd lost to Brianna's lies and the innocence he'd never regain. 4 months later, Ethan moved back to the vineyard. Not forever, but for a prolonged period while he navigated the legal tangle of his void marriage and reconstructed his life. The annulment proceeded smoothly once Brianna's bigamy was verified. She never contested anything likely because she was occupied evading both lenders and authorities. We never heard from her again. The final report from Horizon's investigators located her in Canada, evidently attempting a fresh start with a new alias. I hoped she'd absorbed something from her ordeal, but I doubted it. Women like Brianna Thompson seldom change. The vineyard felt transformed with Ethan there. He immersed himself in the labor with the fervor of someone fleeing their thoughts. He learned to graft vines, assisted with bottling, and assumed the accounting with an efficiency that impressed even the board chair during her routine visits. "Your son has superb business acumen," she told me one afternoon as we watched Ethan bargain with a distributor. "If he ever wants to make an offer on the property, I think the board would be very open." But finances weren't the barrier anymore. Ethan's inheritance from his mother's policy, combined with his own savings and career prospects, would suffice for an initial payment. The true query was whether he wished to bind himself to this locale, to this existence, after all that had transpired. The response arrived on a serene Saturday evening in April. We were on the veranda observing the sun descend over the undulating hills when he finally raised it. "I want to purchase the vineyard," he said plainly. "Are you sure you don't have to feel compelled? I'm not doing it out of compulsion. I'm doing it because this is home. Because this is where Mom and I harvested grapes every fall. Because this is where you taught me to drive the tractor. Because this is where I learned what genuine love entails." He paused, then continued more softly. "Brianna made me forget who I was, where I came from. She made me ashamed of this place, embarrassed by our grounded life. But there's nothing grounded about what you've built here, Dad. There's nothing embarrassing about dedicated work and nurturing the soil." 7 months later, the transfer was finalized. Ethan Harrington became the official proprietor of Willow Creek Vineyard with a loan he could manage comfortably and a father who remained as vineyard steward, though now he reported to him instead of Horizon. The board chair attended the signing, bringing fine wine and an unforeseen present. 28 years ago. "Horizon acquired this vineyard to conserve it," she said, lifting her glass. "Today we're returning it to the family that cherishes it most. It's precisely the result we envisioned when we first encountered your father." As I watched Ethan affix his signature to the papers that made him a landowner, I felt a serenity I hadn't known since Elizabeth passed. My son was home. He was secure, and he was master of his own fate. Brianna Thompson was a fading nightmare, diminishing further each day. That evening, as we patrolled the rows inspecting for signs of pests from the recent rains, Ethan posed the question I'd anticipated. "Do you ever regret it? Concealing the truth about Horizon from me for so long." I pondered the query thoughtfully. "I regret that it rendered you susceptible to Brianna's manipulation. I regret that it complicated your bond with the vineyard, but I don't regret shielding you from monetary anxieties when you were young. And I don't regret collaborating with people who prioritize preserving this land over swift gains." He nodded, then surprised me with his next remark. "I've been reflecting on Mom lately, on what she'd say about all this." "What do you think she'd say?" Ethan smiled, the first truly joyful expression I'd seen from him in months. "I think she'd say that families safeguard each other regardless. And that home isn't about who holds the deed, it's about who belongs here." As we walked back toward the house, I realized that Brianna Thompson had bestowed upon us an unforeseen boon. By attempting to dismantle our family, she'd compelled us to reconstruct it on a base of honesty rather than concealments. We were more resilient now, more transparent with one another, more grateful for what we possessed. The vineyard lights glowed warm and inviting as we neared the residence. Somewhere in the distance, birds were settling for the night. The terrain extended around us, familiar and soothing hours again, in the way that mattered most. I was finally liberated from the burden of secrets, and my son was finally liberated from the sway of a woman who'd never merited his trust. It wasn't the conclusion either of us had envisioned, but it was the conclusion we required. Sometimes the finest retribution is merely enduring those who seek to ruin you. Sometimes the grandest triumph is discovering peace with the truth, no matter how intricate that truth might be. Now, I'm curious about you who followed my story. What would you do in my shoes? Have you endured something akin? Share below. And meanwhile, I'm displaying on the final screen two other tales that are favorites here, and they'll surely astonish you. Thank you for staying till here.